What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Legendz podcast. This one's going to be a bit different. It was actually shot this time last year, in November of last year in New York. And so if anything seems dated for what we're talking about, it was because it was shot last year. It was actually one of my first ever recordings, so be nice to me. But yeah, it was shot with a very cool athlete. He has a very unique story. I think you all should hear it. And without further ado, let's get into it.
It gets feisty. On court, there'll be emotions are flying. We're playing for our livelihoods. We're playing for our dreams, and it can get heated. But then, the vast majority of the time, we shake hands, and we can see each other afterwards and go for a meal or whatever. But the interesting thing is,
for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nora, your host, and for those of you who do, welcome back. We are in New York. I've been told never to trust a man with two first names, but this man is an exception. He leads a healthy and clean lifestyle. He surfs, he sings, he plays the guitar. He's from New Zealand, an overall adventure man, Olympian, might I add. And his day job is playing professional tennis. Welcome, Mr. Marcus Daniell.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on with such short notice. I basically messaged him earlier today. We have a mutual friend, Gabriella Dabrowski, who's
Great
also,
lady.
she's also a doubles player. I've seen you play before. Impeccable. Probably not the best match to watch. But
You watch me get absolutely destroyed by Gab.
Yeah, so the
match
match I watched you was this past US Open in August when you guys were playing mixed doubles against each other. She beat you in Daria Juric 6-2, 6-2.
Yeah, that's correct. And I just lost in a third set tiebreaker, and the men's double was like 2 hours before.
Yeah, you played a
Not
double match, no, that sucks. But you had an incredible match that I also watched earlier in the season. That was at Queens versus the wild cards of Novak Djokovic and Stan Wawrinka. That was a great match.
Yeah, I mean, amazing being on court with legends. Those guys, they'll go down as some of the greats in the game, especially Novak. I think when he won whatever Masters he won recently, he broke the tie of the most big titles ever.
Yeah.
So he's sort of standing out ahead of the pack at the moment. So getting on court with them, especially at a tournament like Queens, which is just beautiful and prestigious, and then coming off the court, beating them, it was pretty special.
Yeah. Was that interesting to see two singles players play doubles?
Yeah, it was. I think there's a little bit of a miscomprehension about singles and doubles, and I think that's quite a good example. If you saw my name and the partner I was playing with, Wesley Koolhof, drawn against Djokovic and Wawrinka on a draw, you'd think, well, that's just going to be a whitewash. But in reality, we walked on that court actually believing we were favourites in a doubles match, because the skill set is just a little different. You have to be sharper at the net, and positioning and strategy is really important on a doubles court. So while I have no doubt that both of them would destroy us on a singles court, we felt pretty comfortable out there.
A lot of people don't realize how different doubles and singles are. Did you start out in singles?
Yeah, well, I started out playing both. I always loved doubles.
Mm-hmm.
I think coming from New Zealand, we have this, it's really a team-based country. And I think just the whole culture sort of is better for producing teams. Like, we have this thing in New Zealand called tall poppy syndrome, which I think might be a New Zealand, Australia thing. And it's the idea that in a field of poppies, they all grow at exactly the same height. And if one grows taller, it just gets chopped down to the same height. Like, you don't want the difference, like everything's uniform.
Okay.
So the way it comes across in our culture is if anyone does something really great, or like tries to differ themselves from the crowd, or like promote themselves, then the culture is just sort of like a little bit leveling. And I think that's a great thing for team sports, because it promotes togetherness and all that sort of stuff. But for individual sports, it's like a little bit fighting against society. It feels a little bit
the odds.
Yeah, and so I always loved playing doubles. My incentives and my drives when I was improving, when I was growing up, they were singles focused. And I believe when I was about 24 or something, I sort of organically decided to start focusing on doubles, because my singles was getting better, and actually I was playing better and better and better, but my doubles was really jumping ahead in the rankings. So I had to make a decision: do I play bigger events in doubles, and earn more prize money that way, and sort of see how the better players in the world are doing things, or do I try and like grind through these lower levels of singles? And the more I sort of flipped between the two, the more I realized I'd prefer to play doubles and try to get to the top of that world.
I'm interested about that because Gabby kind of went through the same process. She started out in singles, started out pretty strong, moved pro, and then it's the realities of the game that a lot of people don't see. It's really pricey, and then at times, like, if you're not winning, you're not earning, right?
Yeah, there are some things that are really brutal about professional tennis that from the outside you don't really see them. It sort of looks glamorous with what you see on TV, but the reality is, unless you get to the very, very top, you're definitely losing money. And tennis is one of the biggest sports in the world in terms of the number of people trying to make it professionally. And the reality is, on the men's side, at least that's the side that I know better, there are probably 300 people in the world who are making a living, like making a decent living from it. And if you compare that to something like we were talking before we started here about football, something like even just the football leagues within England would have thousands of players who are making a really good living, and that's just in one country. And obviously football is by far the biggest sport in the world, but that's just like a demonstration of how narrow the peak of the pyramid is in tennis. And you've got a really long way to go before you get to that peak. And yeah, you're right. Like you got to pay for all of your travel. You got to pay until you get to the very top. You got to pay for your accommodation. And man, staying in hotels week in, week out is super expensive.
Yeah, I can imagine. And also, you don't. At times, you don't even know whether if you're winning or losing. It depends on how long you're staying in one place, and then you have to buy tickets to the next place last second. So you guys are paying top price on a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not even including things like coaching, which is, basically employing someone maybe full time. And that can be, sort of 60 grand plus per year just to cover that. So it is a super expensive sport just to keep going. And so when people see these draws with the prize money associated, it looks big, but the expenses are so huge it cancels out a lot of it. And that's why only 300 people in the world would make a living out of it, or maybe 300 guys and 300 girls, something like that.
Yeah. So I mean, doubles it was kind of a way for you to kind of make it to the bigger tournaments, but still be earning a good amount. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, so I got to the level in singles where I was doing well at futures, and I was sort of starting to play challenges. And just to give people an idea, on tour you've got like the Grand Slams are the 4 biggest tournaments in the world, the things like Wimbledon, and then below that you've got the tour events, which go 1,500 to 50, and then below that challenges, below that futures. And to be making a living, you have to consistently be playing challenges and doing pretty well in them. So I was getting to that stage where maybe I could scratch together a living in challenges, but in doubles I was winning challenges quite regularly and was starting to be able to play tour events. And when you get to tour level, it's a different feeling. The tournaments are big events and wherever they're played, and you get some recognition, and you start really feeling like a tennis player, and that's pretty enticing, especially if you've spent, 10, 15 years of your life already trying to get to that stage. So yeah, for me, doubles was, for one, I really enjoyed it. 2, I was having quite a lot of success at it, and, all of the nice financial benefits and that sort of stuff that started to come with that, and it just felt like the right decision at the time. And actually the other thing that really played into it for me was injury, because I'd always had a really rough time with injury and never really played a full season of singles. And doubles, it is still intense in a slightly different way, but the physical load on your body is not nearly that of singles. So it felt like a smart choice. And yeah, looking back, I think it was.
I mean, it led you to become an Olympian, right? So
yeah, can't.
That's how you and Gabby met at the Olympics, right? In Rio 2016.
I think we knew each other before then. I think she had been friends with another Kiwi called Mike Venus, and I think
you played with him
at the
Rio.
Olympics. Yeah. So at some tournament we were all there together, and Mike was hanging out with Gab, so we chatted a bit. But yeah, hung out at the Olympics and eventually became pretty good friends. And Yeah, she
Nice.
she will just out of the blue message me with like a random question from time to time, and I love it. There's just like zero pleasantries, just straight into the hard stuff. But
She doesn't like the pleasantries.
I like
She doesn't
it. I
like the
appreciate
how's
it.
it going? How you feeling?
Yeah.
How was that match? She's like, don't ask me about tennis. Just tell me about something random about your day and I'll respond. I was like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, it's you do feel like you need that often if you've just been like spending your time in tennis circles. It's just something completely different.
Yeah, because a lot of the time, you guys, it's a very independent sport. You don't have like I mean, even as a doubles player, you have your teammate, but generally speaking, you guys all kind of keep to yourselves, right? Because you see each other more, or I guess maybe in the women's side, but
Yeah, I think it's a little more like that on the women's side. It seems they're not so keen on leaving the on-court stuff on-court. And I think on the men's side, we're a little more relaxed around that. Like, it gets feisty. Like on-court, there'll be emotions are flying. We're playing for our livelihoods. We're playing for our dreams, and it can get heated. But then the vast majority of the time, we shake hands and we can see each other afterwards and go for a meal or whatever. But the interesting thing is, so on the doubles side, we do have our teammates, and with our teammates, interests are absolutely aligned. We're trying to succeed, and each of us playing well will help both of us succeed. So that's one person you can sort of have a deep friendship with. And then outside of that, it's nice to have friends on tour, but the reality is that every day we could come across each other on court, and we're going to do everything we can to like take money away from that person's family. And that's just the nature of the sport. So we all get along really well, but there's just that little barrier that prevents us from being like the deepest sort of friends,
Yeah, how does that go? Like if you're playing, against, let's say, your best mate on tour, does that affect you mentally at all?
No, actually, often I find it easier playing against friends because there's the certainty that despite what happens on court, we know our hearts are in the right place.
Right.
And with people you're not so sure about that with, there's a chance that if you show a bit of fire, that they could take that the wrong way. But at the end of the day, we see each other so much. We spend like 30 to 40 weeks of the year on the road, seeing a lot of the same people, and it's not nice if your work environment has grudges and pettiness, and I think most people try to avoid that.
Yeah, I can imagine. You guys are basically it's like a camp that just moves together across the world. Yeah. Even the Grand Slams or the bigger tournaments where you have the men and women in the same tournament, you guys just same faces almost, daily, weekly. Yeah. What's the locker room like? Is there banter, or is there frustration? Is it tension?
There's a bit of everything. I do find it's a little bit cliquey in terms of language, which I guess is understandable. Like everyone is the most relaxed in their native tongue. And there's tension. I mean, I think there are boundaries that everyone respects, which is, if someone's had a tough loss, or, if someone's visibly upset or pissed off, like people sort of give them space, or we'll just say hard luck and keep walking, or that sort of thing. So, I mean, there's a nice level of respect in general. But yeah, you see some stuff. You see some people losing their shit and throwing things and breaking rackets and all that sort of stuff. But it's a high emotion game.
How did you start? You played in the mountains of Slovakia.
Yeah.
How did you get there?
Wow, that was a very strange life and career move.
Because you were 17, correct?
I was 17, yeah. Well, okay, so I come from a farm in New Zealand, and sort of started. We had this old concrete tennis court out at the farm, and my parents would play for fun of an evening. And I had an older brother and an older sister, and they wanted to join in with my parents. So of course I wanted to join in with them. So from the age I could walk, I was dragging a tennis racket around and trying to whack stuff with it. So sort of got into it that way. And then, didn't really play that much until I was 15 or so. I mean, I played tennis during the summer, but I actually played football during the winter, and played both to a pretty high level. Like I was in the national squad for football until I was 14, or for a couple of years from like 13 to 14, and then I had to make a choice between the two, and chose tennis, and really regretted it for like 5 years. But I'd made the decision and moved up to a boarding school in Auckland, so I could train more and train throughout the year. And then, so I was there for 2 years, and I had 1 year of school left, but I felt like I'd reached sort of an end of what I could achieve in New Zealand, because we're a pretty small country with a pretty small pool of tennis players, and I'd been consistently sort of in the top 3 or whatever since I was about 12, and a couple of those guys had stopped or had moved overseas, so I didn't feel like I could improve more in New Zealand. And I was working with this Slovak coach at the time who convinced me that his little town in the mountains in Slovakia was like, an amazing place to go and train. And my parents didn't know any better. I didn't know any better. And so, age of 17, speaking 2 phrases of Slovakian, which I think at the time were numbers 1 to 10, and you have beautiful blue eyes.
How did that work for you?
Yeah. Not so well, actually. Didn't work for me once, which was a shame. But so moved to Slovakia, and lived in this, like, it looked sort of like a prison block, and I think I was one of the only people living in this big sort of communist looking block of apartments. Or I think it might have been like a university dorm, like a sort of an abandoned university dorm or something. Okay. Anyway, I was on the ground floor next to a dentist, and I had this tiny little room with a tiny little bed and a shower that it was like either a tiny little dribble of boiling hot water or slightly more of a dribble and just freezing cold. And there was no one there to practice with, and
so you were the only tennis player there?
Well, there were so my coach was there, and he was living at home, and then there were 2 sort of club players, okay. 40-year-old club players. So it was really not a step up from what I had. And, I didn't speak the language. Back then, Slovakia was still... It didn't really feel like a European country. It was. It still felt quite communist. Like it had that vibe to it and that sort of drabness to it, dare I say. And it was tough. It was really tough. I had no idea how to order food, or just getting anything done was difficult. But it was my first big move away from home. And, I'd always thought of myself as an independent person, so I convinced myself that it was toughening me up and sort of stuck at it for a while. But after a few months, I just said to the coach, actually, I was just like, look, this is not good enough. I need to play with players who are better than me. I need to improve. And to give him some credit, he did get in touch with an academy in Bratislava, in the capital of Slovakia. And I moved there, and I ended up training there for the better part of 3 years, and sort of slowly learned Slovak enough to get by, and just sort of made it work. But there was a lot of convincing myself that it was the right thing to do, which in hindsight was stupid because it really wasn't, and there were better options. I mean, for example, before I went to Slovakia, I had offers from different American colleges and refused them because I thought it was the soft option, or that maybe I'd sort of start partying and forget about tennis.
Yeah, a lot of people, from what I've heard, a lot of tennis players, bypass the college option because it's said that it's better to go play pro when you're younger, right?
Yeah, so I think that thought pattern is changing, and I think it should change. And I think it's a better option on the men's side. to go to college than it is on the women's side, just because I think men mature a lot later, and I think on the men's side you need to be physically mature to really have a shot. Whereas on the women's side, I think...
I thought you meant mentally. I was like, I know.
Well, yeah, both, yeah. Well, do you mature at college as a man? I don't know.
Who knows?
But yeah, like now I think more schools are becoming renowned for producing pro players and, having programs that actually focus on pushing people out the back end rather than, squeezing the wins that they can out of them at college, and that's it. So yeah, I mean, looking back on it, I wish I'd gone to college, and I just wish I'd visited colleges and places that I found beautiful, like on the coast or that sort of thing.
Right.
Because I only visited a college in Illinois and just couldn't imagine coming from New Zealand, couldn't, like loving the coast and the mountains and blah, blah, blah. Couldn't imagine living in cornfields for 4 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, so off to Slovakia it was.
But so you transitioned from Slovakia. I read that you got a herniated disc. Is that correct? That's a rough injury to come back from and manage. How did you go on from there? What did you decide to do?
That was really rough actually, because I'd made pretty good progress in Slovakia. Like I'd improved quickly. Before I was out of school, I had a pro singles ranking. I think I was like in the 700s when I was 17. Which is, a step in the right direction. Was working insanely hard there. I mean, we were doing probably 7 to 8 hours of training a day when you include, the stretching sessions and that sort of stuff.
That's insane.
It was insane. And the thing about it was, it wasn't really, like the tennis part was coached, and then the physical part was pushed rather than coached. So, we'd be taken to a squat rack and told to squat as heavy as we could, as many as we could. And if you don't know how to squat, you don't know the technique of squatting, then that's a really dangerous move. That's the same as someone who'd never worked out going to like a CrossFit gym and someone saying, do 30 reps in a minute of deadlifts or whatever. You're just putting strain on really the wrong parts of your body. So, I was young, I was 17, but after a few years of that, my back just gave out. And the timing was really rough, because I'd actually just, when I was 20, I'd got a wild card into the Auckland ATP tournament, the doubles, and had totally randomly won it. And that was a big deal.
Totally randomly.
Well, like I'd never played a tour event in my life. Like, it was, I think my doubles ranking was like 300 and something at the time, something like that. So, to come from there and win a tour event was out of the blue. And that catapulted my ranking, and, it gave me some image in New Zealand, because we hadn't had a New Zealand tour champion for like over a decade or something. And so I could have used that as like a stepping stone, but then I think it was about 2 months later, my disc gave out, and I spent I wasn't back on tour properly, I think, for about 8 months. And I screwed myself over because being a Canadian, you'd know this, the Commonwealth Games.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we had the Commonwealth Games, and it was being held in India, and I'd been selected for the team, and it was the only time tennis has been in the Commonwealth Games, because the host country gets to choose a sport that they add in.
Oh.
And India was pretty strong in tennis at that time. So, the one chance in a lifetime to play tennis at the Commonwealth Games, and I tried to come back for that and play a prep tournament, and my back just screwed out again.
Before you're ready.
Yeah. So then it was like another sort of 4 months, 5 months after that. So yeah, that was tough. But then I think the thing that it did for me was it gave me a bit of perspective on Slovakia and on the sort of lifestyle I wanted to live, and the sort of attitude I wanted to bring to life. And no offense to Slovakia, I had some good times there, but just the general attitude of the people towards relationships and that sort of stuff was just a little different from what I wanted to bring. So decided to look for other options, and sort of spent a year out of a suitcase, just traveling and staying with friends in my spare time, and eventually landed in Bath in England at an academy there, and super grateful to have met the team there and the coaches there who I still work with now. And that was sort of the start of a really solid and long-term improvement process.
So one of the reasons why I became very intrigued by your story, and just Gabby said you needed, talk to this legend. She mentioned she's mentioned multiple times, and also because I know she started using the protein powder from Nuzest, and you lead a very healthy lifestyle. You eat very clean. You don't use any chemicals at all on your body.
Wow, she really has told you about me.
Oh yeah, like you cleared your psoriasis, everything like that. That's crazy. So how did that kind of like start with the injuries, like managing it?
Yeah, I'd never really thought about where it had started. I mean, I think ultimately it started because my mum is a bit of a health freak. She's grown her own vegetables for decades and decades, and at home has a big veggie garden, and we'd eat from that. And I think my brothers and sisters and my father, we all appreciated it. So, despite the teenage rebellious years of wanting to eat junk food as much as possible, I think that gave me a real appreciation for good food. But, outside of wanting to be able to perform the best I could, definitely being injured too much has made me think about, every aspect of my life and what could be hindering me. And I always felt like I ate pretty well, always had a decent idea of what sort of macros I had to get in and that sort of stuff. And then, like you mentioned, when I was probably 21 or 22, I was in England traveling to a tournament, just got a bit of a sore throat, and next day woke up with all these like little red bumps over my body, and I thought I was maybe having an allergic reaction to some washing powder or something. But it just got worse and worse, and eventually got diagnosed as guttate psoriasis, and it was rough. Like it was, like red all over my body and sort of blatantly unhealthy skin, and it made me super self-conscious. I remember going from that tournament in England to Dublin to play in a futures there, and just feeling people sort of double looking and in the changing rooms, in the showers, people being like, man, what's going on, and that was really tough. And then so I got it diagnosed, and got all these steroid creams and had to moisturize after every shower to keep the skin moist and like not flaky and all this sort of stuff, and was just traveling with like kilo tubs of moisturizer because as an athlete you're showering 2-3 times a day. And got so sick of it. I sort of managed to keep it sort of under control, but all these lotions and potions and flare-ups and eventually these two people I know really well, their theories sort of insidiously snuck into my mind. One's my brother, who has this theory that if you just let your body do its thing, it will sort of take care of itself. And that's his experience through, going on long camping trips or whatever. You feel gross for the first week, but then you sort of reach a bit of an equilibrium with just having like dips in the river or, that sort of thing. And then this other friend, Tom Darlow, who for like over a decade had super long hair and he never washed it. And it was like a luxurious mane. Like it was gorgeous.
It was gorgeous. It wasn't like greasy and stringy.
No, man, it was like a mane of thick black hair.
Damn. What's his name?
Tom Darlow.
Damn, Tom.
Yeah.
I
Look him
see
up.
That man.
He's a legend. Shit. You should have him on this podcast. That guy is a legend. Anyway, so I was like, I sort of want to give this a go. Like, what is there to lose? And I was living with a girlfriend at the time, and I sort of ran it by her because my theory was, okay, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to stop using anything chemical on my skin. Actually, I'm just going to stop using anything on my skin.
Like cold turkey?
Cold turkey,
oh, wow.
Just for a month. Because what's the worst that can happen? The worst that happens is I get a flare-up of psoriasis, and that's happened a bunch anyway, and I'm back to square one. And so yeah, I just completely stopped. And the reason I ran it past it was because this included like deodorant and all that sort of stuff. So I had to get her on board with the BO.
You just showed a photo of the mane and said,
Yeah,
this could be
like,
me
yeah, exactly.
in a month.
Yeah. Anyway, so I stopped using everything, and it was miraculous. It was like within a week, my psoriasis was gone. And
Wow.
and it sounds like, infomercially late night TV, but it was just gone within a week.
Were you at the time already eating, like changing your diet, or was this just chemicals?
Fair point. So, like 3 months earlier, I'd read some stuff that suggested that nightshades and red meat and alcohols outside of red wine, basically, they could increase the inflammation of your skin. So I'd cut down on that stuff at that stage. I hadn't, rid myself of it, but I had cut down. So there was a few months of that, but I hadn't noticed any change because I still reached the stage where I was like, I need to do something drastic.
Right.
But then it was a drastic improvement within that first week. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, very smelly. And for the first few days, I had like flaky skin and stuff. Because I feel like when you use a bunch of products, you just get used to it. Like your skin gets used to not having to produce its own oils or that sort of stuff.
Right.
And so if you stop giving it that constant input, then it will react and it will go dry. But after a few days,
once you pass that stage.
Exactly.
Right.
And then for the hair, it took a little longer. Like it took like 2 or 3 weeks or something before my hair felt like it wasn't gross. But since then, I mean,
Shout outs to the former girlfriend. My good God.
Yeah. Well, I think, ended up, I think, positive for both of us. Like
no, for sure.
less self-conscious Marcus and, clear skin and eventually I started using deodorant again as well. So it was fine. But yeah, I mean, since then, I only use like coconut oil on my skin, and if I want to wash my hair, I use baking soda and apple cider vinegar, and I just use super natural deodorants. And I think Big Pharma is just pulling wool over billions of people's eyes.
Yeah.
And it's not just me. Like I've people have come to me saying, I wrote this thing. My brother was hounding me for a couple of years to write this experience and just post it on Reddit or whatever. So eventually I did. And I had some people who were just super skeptical, which is totally fair enough. Like if I saw that on the internet, I'd struggle to believe it. But I've had a lot of people come and say, I've tried like one aspect of it or whatever, and it's helped me hugely, especially with the hair and like not washing the hair except with natural stuff. So yeah, it's actually been like a really nice process of people sort of reaching out. It's been great.
I mean, people lived before all those chemicals. You
Yeah.
know? So, of course, I definitely think the natural way is. I think it's just we're in an age of consumerism, and
Yes.
people don't know anything different.
And an age where like products are just forced upon you. I mean, like the fear mongering and do you have like this or this or this? Then you need this product that we're selling you.
Yeah. You told me before we started about who'd you start listening to about do no harm?
I'm not sure it actually has a name, but there's a philosopher, probably one of the most eminent philosophers alive today, called Peter Singer.
Peter Singer, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, this Australian dude, and he wrote what's sort of considered the Bible on animal ethics, which is called Animal Liberation. And a little over 2 years ago, I had this sort of moment in my life where I was sort of shocked into thinking about animals and my relationship with them, and not just with animals but with the environment, and like how I can improve my own outlook on that stuff and my own impact. And I'd read some of his stuff before because I'd done some philosophy stuff through university, but his book Animal Liberation was like all of the final nails in the coffin for me to become vegetarian, or his version of vegetarianism, which that's what we were talking about, which is like basically do no suffering if you can help it, which is anything non-sentient is okay to consume, and anything sentient can suffer and therefore not okay to kill.
For example, like crustaceans, you can eat those.
Anything below crustaceans.
Anything below.
The current science says everything from sort of crabs or shrimp upwards should probably be considered sentient, although that crustacean band is sort of a little bit of a grey area at the moment, apparently. But below that, you've got things like mussels, scallops, oysters, that sort of stuff, and they just don't supposedly have the anatomy to experience suffering. So they might have reflexive responses to stimuli, but they can't experience a mental state, so to speak.
So how does that affect your training, your tennis? Does that, obviously diet plays a huge part in it?
Yeah, well, so I was worried at first.
Because a lot of people are skeptical about, veganism, vegetarian, but I think it's, seeing players like you and even Novak Djokovic who are changing their diets completely.
Yeah, totally.
And making it work.
There's actually a really good documentary that came out very recently called The Game Changers. Have you seen that?
I've heard about it, haven't seen it.
Yeah, so it's worth a watch, because I feel like the vegan documentaries that have been made up until The Game Changers have had some valuable stuff in them, but I feel like they've been an unfairly one-sided picture. And while I think that might be a necessary tactic and improving the health of the planet and improving the way we think about animals, and also because the dairy and meat industry has been totally one-sided in how they've portrayed their own results and stuff, as someone who likes the truth and actually having a fair picture of things, I feel like Game Changers is as good as we've got at the moment, and they really go into, it's more like a performance-based documentary rather than an ethics-based or environmental-based documentary, and it's just got a bunch of world champion or top-level athletes who have these stories of having switched to veganism and having their performances improve hugely. And so I mean, for me, at first, I was really worried about getting enough protein, especially because on tour we often have limited options provided by the tournament to eat. So once I'd sort of decided I needed to try to change something, I had a week back at my base, which at the time was Barcelona, where I said, okay, I'm going to cook and eat everything vegan or vegetarian for this week, see how I feel with training. And then if that feels okay, I'm going to do a trial period of the 2 weeks on tour, which were, I think, Stockholm and Basel or something like that, and see if on tour I can get enough protein as well. And it was no problem at all. I mean, in some countries, it's harder than others, and strangely, it's actually places like France or like Holland that they have this sort of really traditional idea of food and just don't really vary too much outside that, except in the big cities. But in like the smaller towns, it can be hard to find a really rounded vegetarian meal. Like you might get a risotto, but you don't get the protein or that sort of thing. But in general, yeah, it's been a lot easier than I expected, and that was a relief, because like I told you, growing up on a farm and being an athlete, like I was used to eating a lot of meat.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So it's doable.
It's more than doable. I think it's like, my experience was, the deeper I looked into it, the more I realized that nutritionally there was nothing to be lost. And actually, as more science and results around it are coming out, there's quite a lot to be gained. But then alongside that, I think ethically there's a huge amount to be gained. I do just feel like a better human for trying to stay really strict to this idea of what I think is ethical. And then undoubtedly, environmentally, there's a huge positive from it. I think there are three different angles you can look at it from. And for me, all of those boxes have a big tick in them.
Yeah, I definitely think it's about balance. I think it's also it's a foreign concept still to a lot of people. There's not enough, people don't have the knowledge yet. So seeing players, actual athletes, using these diets, implementing them day to day and hearing about it, how they do it, I think it's good, because it just shows that it's possible.
Yeah, totally.
You can live a sustainable lifestyle, still play, be active and
healthy. And possible for people who are, pushing their bodies to the limits every day. So if it's possible for someone like that, then, it's possible for anyone who's doing less than that. And the other thing I'd say is, man, some of the stuff now is so good. It's so tasty. The best burger I have ever had in my life was in my favorite cafe in Barcelona was a little place called Caravel, and they had this Beyond Burger on the menu, and it was just insane, like better than any meat burger I'd tasted before. So like the substitutes that are coming out now are really, really good.
Nice. Any advice to any, future tennis players? In general, both, food, just coming up. You have quite the story, so you have quite the experience.
I think I only have downer advice. Well, okay, so anyone who's like on the fence about playing tennis, I'd say be really sure that it's really what you want, because it's a tough road and the chances of success are pretty minimal.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know is like a lot of tennis players, especially coming up, if financially, it's a lot of parents are mortgaging their houses even just to make a start out of it. You're traveling by yourself a lot of the times. So you can't hire a coach for every tournament.
Yeah.
Unless you have, financial backing.
There are so many tripwires. I mean, financially is a huge one, because if you don't come from a country that has a federation that sort of backs their junior players and provides like either coaching or has tournaments in the area that you can drive to from home, if you don't have that, it's so expensive and you're not going to get any return on that investment until you maybe like 0.1% chance make it to the top of the pros. So either you've got to have wealthy and really generous and supportive families, or you've got to have a federation that backs you. And look, when you do get to the top, it's got a lot of pros to it. Like it's quite special to be able to play in front of crowds and to do something you love and stay fit for a job. You get to see a lot of the world. You see a lot of different cultures, and the bigger tournaments put on amazing experiences during the events, and do like tours and special things like that. But I would say to kids and parents, like it's really got to be the dream. Like it can't be half-assed at all, because there are tens of thousands of really talented kids out there and only a few make it. And yeah, like we were saying, it's not just about talent. Like if you don't have the independence to survive for 30 weeks a year on the road by yourself, then maybe it's not for you either. In terms of positive advice, it's a fantastic game. It is. I mean, I think with every endeavor, with every sport, like the deeper you scratch, the more interesting it becomes. And I think with tennis, there's no end to the depth. Like, the more you understand about it, the more you can appreciate the nuance and appreciate the tactics and the strategy and the things that go into it, not just from the player but from the team, and like the physicality and the coaching and that sort of stuff. So it's a beautiful game, and it's one that you'll be able to enjoy for most of your life. And yeah, so I guess positive advice is, enjoy the beauty of it.
Love it. All right, Marcus, any socials?
Not really. I'm pretty useless with it.
Twitter, Instagram, any shout outs there?
I think I have an Instagram thing, but I don't have it on my phone anymore, so that might be a bit of a dead end. I think on Facebook I'm like Marcus Daniell Tennis. Okay. But yeah, just like come watch me in the flesh.
All right, guys. Yeah, come watch him in the flesh. And thank you so much. Thanks for everyone who was listening. Really glad to have you on. Legend extraordinaire.
It was fun.
Like and subscribe, guys, to keep the party going. See you next time.